All right, so I want to talk to you about Docker, and I think this is my favorite technology um, for at least the last few weeks, and I think it's going to be a big one for 2015. And I'm sure you've heard maybe about Docker, but really people don't really like understand what it is. So I'm gonna try to do an introduction here so that you understand, at least in a very um, fundamental way, or at least in the 10,000 feet view, what Docker is. So Docker is basically it's a platform to be able to run and distribute applications easier. So the way I think about Docker is that it's a container system that allows you to instantiate these containers within your machine, and it can be anything from your laptop to a cloud server in Amazon, or a metal server that you have in your hosted environment. But the way that now you distribute and organize those containers is much easier, because what happens is um, you're making a copy, or you're running as close as production as possible. So instead of installing, for example, on your Mac or on your Windows machine, MySQL using the Mac binaries or the Windows binaries, which have a problem on their own and they're not exactly the same as when you push to production, then you might have problems, or it's just like a pain to install MySQL and Apache and PHP and Nginx and all the things that you're going to be using on your production environment in your local machine. So Docker allows you to basically create a Docker API or a Docker client, that then where you can then spawn little servers that are exactly the same. They run the same Linux operating system version and distro, but they're very very light, and you can then run your applications there. And the best thing is that you can live edit your code within this container, so you can still use your favorite editor in your machine. So I'm pretty excited. I played over my December vacations with it, and I'm hooked. I'm really hooked, and I'm trying to get this Docker system running in my company where I work at, as well as start building the my applications using Docker, which I already am, and talking to as much people as possible about how great it is. So what makes Docker different? And I'm taking this from the Docker website. Normally, what you do is you run virtual machines in your computer if you want to do the more or less the same thing. So I used VirtualBox in the past, and lately I've become a fan of Parallels because it runs really really fast, and it's lightweight for the Mac. Um, but the way that when you have virtual machines, so let's say you want to have, which is a very typical setup, you want to have an application server with its own Apache web server or Nginx, and then you want to have a database server. So the way to do that, normally you would have those two virtual boxes, or parallel instances, or whatever you wanna use, running at the same time in your machine. But of course, this is slow. It's eating a lot of memory, because what happens is, this is your, let's say, the web application. You need all these libraries in there, and then you have the guest OS, which is the whatever Linux flavor you have, and then you have your hypervisor and a host OS, which is your machine, and then your server. And the same thing goes for the database server. You have the application, which would be MySQL or MongoDB, its own libraries, its own guest OS. So it's very clunky, and it doesn't run very well. Um, with Docker, what you do is you have your applications, and their binaries and libraries, they're separated. But then you have the Docker engine, which is kind of like the hypervisor in this case, or the virtualization engine. And then you have one host OS, which is basically like a base Linux flavor. And then each application has the different. It can have different Linux versions, or you can have the same. And it doesn't have to. You don't have to run them at the same time, i.e., those two OSs. You're just running one OS, which is the common one, and then whatever dependencies each application has. So as you can see, this makes it more portable. It's more lightweight. You can run effectively two servers in a very small, limited amount of RAM. And as I said, you can even edit the code within your application using your existing editor. Another thing I like is that once you have the server the way you like it, you can then create an image. And think of images as basically repositories of all the settings, the libraries, and the way that you want to run your machine. And there's like some official ones, and they're organized in this place called the Docker Hub, which is basically, think of it as GitHub. It's basically the same thing, where people can contribute, and they have their profiles and stuff. You can star and favorite repositories, and you can have either public or private repositories as well. So if you want to have your own like internal company kind of like server configuration stored, then it's really really easy. And you do the same thing. You do like a Git clone. You do basically, there's a Docker command for that, and then you commit the image, which is Docker commit, and then Docker push, and it pushes here. So you can distribute this with your coworkers or with your community. So how do we install Docker in our machine, Mac or Windows? You use this utility called boot to Docker, which is an officially supported Docker client that runs in your machine. And it's a little, it sounds complicated, but it's not. It's really, really fast. But boot to Docker, what it does is that it instantiates and installs VirtualBox, and then it runs basically a Docker container using VirtualBox, which then you can subdivide into the smaller containers. I thought when I read this that this was going to be like very bloated and very, very slow, but to be honest, I've been running it and it's really, really good. So you most definitely, I recommend you downloading it. And for Linux, you don't have to do anything because Linux basically can hold Docker. So you just install Docker, and you're good to go. But it's a very visually simple process to install, and we're gonna take a look at how to install for Mac and for Windows shortly.